Hey guys, Chris here. Today we're in the second part of this series about this man whose body was found at the base of California's second highest peak, Mount Williamson. We're going to find out who he was, what happened to him, and how he was involved in World War II. That's next. All right, we are high in the Sierra. We're at Carson Pass, and that's where we're doing the story tonight. And I have a beer tonight, as usual. I got a Founders All Day IPA, and I dropped that in the creek down below earlier on my hike this evening. Ooh, a little shaken up there. And last we talked about in this story, like I said, two hikers in California found this mysterious body at the base of Mount Williamson, second highest peak in California. The Sheriff's Department of Inyo County in Eastern California determined through DNA that it was matched with a man who disappeared in 1945, 75 years ago, when they found his body in 2019, so now it's 3 years later, 78 years ago today, and his name was Gishi Matsumura. He was a 46-year-old man at that time, and he was hiking up there from down below is where he was living in an internment camp called Manzanar. And an internment camp is another word for a war relocation center or a concentration camp. Gishi Matsumura was put in this war relocation center after the start of World War II by the U.S. government because he was a man of Japanese descent, and the U.S. government had removed all people of Japanese descent off of the West Coast into the interior of the West because of the Japanese bombing Pearl Harbor December 7th, 1941. And that is where our story begins.
Speaker, members of the Senate, and the House of Representatives, yesterday, December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy, the United States of America was suddenly and deliberately attacked by naval and air forces of the Empire of Japan. The United States was at peace with that nation, and at the solicitation of Japan was still in conversation with its government and its emperor, looking toward the maintenance of peace in the Pacific. The attack yesterday on the Hawaiian Islands has caused severe damage to American naval and military forces. I regret to tell you that very many American lives have been lost. In addition, American ships have been reported torpedoed on the high seas between San Francisco and Honolulu. As Commander-in-Chief of the Army and Navy, I have directed that all measures be taken for our defense. But always will our whole nation remember the character of the onslaught against us. No matter how long it may take us to overcome this premeditated invasion, the American people in their righteous might will win through to absolute victory.
So at the start of World War II, the U.S. government felt insecure and afraid of the American citizens that were of Japanese descent. There was 120,000 Japanese people living mostly in Washington, Oregon, and California. FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, in February of 1942, just a couple months after the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7th, signed Executive Order 9066, which was the Exclusion Act to exclude Japanese people that were citizens and put them in internment camps, prison camps, essentially. These prison camps were scattered throughout the interior of the western United States and a little bit east past the Rockies in places like Missouri. They were in Colorado, Utah, Wyoming, Idaho, and eastern California, as well as some other places. There was 10 camps. They placed 120,000 Japanese American citizens in these camps, and they were given orders from the government that arrived as a telegram or a letter in the mail, and it said you are to report to a location to be transported to a specific camp through bus, train, whatever form of transportation, and they were only to carry whatever they could carry in their hands in a suitcase or a duffel bag or whatever, and report to these camps under an executive order. This was to include men, women, and children, so entire families were to report to these camps. During this time, there was a hysteria, a prejudice, a fear of Japanese people, and it was unfounded. Gishi Matsumura was obviously one of these people, and he had to report to Manzanar with his family in 1942. Okay, so I had a clip from my video. It did not work out, so I'm reshooting it right now. I actually thought I had the record button going, and I didn't, so this is the next night. Just FYI, I'm continuing with the story. So Mr. Matsumura was sent to Manzanar, 1942, had his family. He was a family man, he was married, he had 3 boys and a girl that came to the camp with him. He had a wife, her name was Ito, I-T-O, I believe that's how you pronounce it. And they all were together in Manzanar for the duration of the war, which was 1945. While he was in Manzanar, he was also a cook for the camp to help out and do his part. Also, he had served, this is really interesting, he had served in World War I. He was a veteran, served in the military, and after World War II broke out, he voluntarily enlisted before the executive order was given, 9066, to exclude Japanese people from the West Coast and put them in these camps. He was already an American service veteran, and he was ready to go again. And it didn't make a difference. He was still incarcerated with his family. Another thing, while he was in camp over the years, the 3+ years that he was in this camp, 3.5, almost 4 years, actually, he learned watercolor. He loved to paint watercolor. It was an escape for him. He would paint the Mount Williamson that was always in their view. He would paint around camp, landscape. He loved this stuff. It really made him come alive. So, at the close of the war, the U.S. government could see that the Japanese people were not going to be a threat to them, and the war in Europe was ending. It actually ended July 1945, and then they could see the war in the Pacific was going to need to be finished out. So they were making plans to finish out the war in the Pacific, and they were actually going to deploy a 1 million+ people to invade Japan from the ground and from the air and just finish the thing off. That was before the Hiroshima bomb was delivered August 6th, 1945, which happens to be today. Today's August 6th, 2022. Kind of interesting. But once they lifted the restrictions, Gishi Matsumura really wanted to go up into the mountains, and he heard about these 10 other men that were going to make the trip up to Mount Williamson to go fishing. And they'd been up there before. They knew the route, they knew how to get up there, and they wanted to catch some fish, and there was rainbow trout up there, so they were going to catch some trout and be up there for several days and then bring them back down to their families below. And again, because the restrictions were lifted, they could leave, but the Matsumura family had no home to return to, no business to return to, and so they stayed in the camp to buy some time until they could figure out exactly what they wanted to do. And during this time, on July 29th, Mr. Matsumura decided to go on this little expedition to the base of Mount Williamson. His wife, Ito, was not happy about this. In fact, she felt really some concern and even dread about it. And she even cried. She said, I really don't want you to go. She just had a bad feeling about it. He still went anyways. That's man, right? And while they were up there, the men were fishing, the 10 other men, and Mr. Matsumura was painting. And on August 2nd, 1945, he said, hey, I want to stay up here and continue to paint. You guys can head down to the next lake and the series of lakes down below at the base of Mount Williamson in the Williamson Bowl and fish. You do your thing, I'll do my thing. That afternoon, a freak snowstorm came into and over the Sierra Nevada mountains. The men down below that were fishing knew of a cave that was up above the lakes along some cliffs. They went into this cave and they survived the night. Made a fire, were all together, stayed dry. The next morning, they went to look for Mr. Matsumura. They did not find him. They went back up to the lake where they had last seen him. He was supposed to show up that evening and catch them before the sun went down. He never showed up. They couldn't find him anywhere. They did find his sweater. It was very concerning that they found a sweater because he could have used that. Of course, when a sweater gets saturated and it's a knit sweater, that's actually going to keep all the moisture on you. Really similar kind of conditions that happened to these two women in Utah who went out for a day hike, and the snow came in, a snowstorm came in, and they got soaked and they went in the wrong direction, and it was fatal. The men knew they had to head back down. They had only so much time to look, and so they were hoping that maybe he worked his way back down the mountain before the snowstorm came, and he was maybe waiting for them at camp. That was the hope at that point. They didn't know for sure. They made it back to camp. He was not there. They informed his family, his wife, that he is still up there somewhere. We're hoping he's alive, but every day that went by, it didn't look good. His wife was really upset. They went back up another time, some men, to look, and they found nothing. Came back down. A month later, September 2nd, 1945, two people from Independence, California, a couple, husband and wife, they came down and did the hike up to Mount Williamson. On their way back down, I believe, they found Mr. Matsumura in the boulder field, the Williamson Bowl. They immediately went down the mountain, worked their way down to the internment camp. They could see he was a man of Japanese descent. They told the camp director told the family, because they knew he was missing, that he had been found. Now they were really upset. They were grieving this, and there was no way to go back up and have a funeral for him, or even to bring his remains down. So they had a funeral for him in the camp. 150 people from the camp showed up for this funeral within the Manzanar camp, the community. And the Japanese people from the camp that were friends and family of Mr. Matsumura dressed up in their best suits. The women had dresses, and as is Buddhist tradition, they had these giant flower displays and had a big funeral for Mr. Matsumura. A day later, 6 men from the camp went up to have a formal burial for him. The wife of Mr. Matsumura, I believe her name was Ita, I-T-A, Ita or Ita. She had a special sheet that she got, and she hand painted on this sheet with a fine like bamboo brush in Japanese characters some words for Mr. Matsumura in honor of him, something to remember him by. They brought 6 men brought this sheet up the mountain. They found his body at the location that this couple had told them the body was at, and that is where they had buried him. They removed the stones around where he was, and they carefully wrapped him in this sheet, laid him on the ground, and then carefully built the rocks around him in a tomb, essentially. Folded his hands like this, wrapped him, and then they made a headstone. They found a rock that would serve as a headstone, and they taped on this rock a piece of paper, because there was no way to chisel anything in there and take the time to do that. That was the best they could do. They taped a piece of paper on the stone, the headstone, and it had his name, the date, and his age, and some other relevant information in case anybody else found that they could see that, oh, this is a grave site now. This is where he was to be left, because there was no way to get his body down. It was too far to haul him down, too heavy. It was 12 miles from this location down to the camp. And there was no helicopters that could get up there at this time. World War II, they had helicopters, but they couldn't go up to this location, and they weren't getting helicopters up here to do like they do now with search and rescue. And the police, they can, do a lot with helicopters, fight fires and other things like that. I've seen them where they follow traffic in cities, and they'll just track in a car chase. Pretty amazing. But back then in 1945, they couldn't do that. The family was really devastated that they couldn't see him once again. They were really sad that they could not go to his and see him, at least see him. And it was very surreal for them because they knew he was gone, but they couldn't connect that he was really gone because he was up on this mountain. They knew his friends of his saw him, and they knew he was passed. And in November of that year, a month after this, or maybe it was October, about a month later, they had to move back to Santa Monica. And so they needed to leave Camp Manzanar, and in the process leave their father and husband up on this very tall mountain in Eastern California. Again, 13,370 foot, the actual peak, which they could clearly see from the camp for all those years. They could clearly see it, and they knew he was up there. He became known as the Ghost of Manzanar because over the years, the camp was discontinued, closed down, and I believe it was abandoned for a while. It became part of the National Park Service historic preservation system, Camp Manzanar. You can visit it today. I've driven by it, and whenever I have driven by it, it's usually been closed, so I haven't been able to stop in. But I've seen guard towers out in the desert at the base of this tall mountain. I've seen barracks, and there's a visitor center, and there's some monuments and signboards to tell about the information and the story that happened at Camp Manzanar. And so the family, over the years after this, would go back to Manzanar after it was closed and pay tribute to Gishi Matsumura, husband, father. But over time, his grave was lost to memory because nobody could go back up there to really keep track and lay flowers on his grave, and they lost track of where he really was. And that's how he became known as the Ghost of Manzanar, because after 75 years, nobody really knew exactly where he was. It was just too vast of an area. And the headstone that was there with the paper, that had long been gone. And so that brings us to our next chapter, where we're going to talk about where Gishi Matsumura's final resting place was and how the family dealt with this news of refinding his body 75 years later, after all this drama happened because of World War II, and their father, and then now grandfather and great-grandfather, was mysteriously up on some mountain in Southern California. And that's what we're going to be talking about next on this series. So we have caught the end of the day here. My battery's holding out for another minute, so I'm really happy about that. Quite a story, though. I do want to touch more on these internment camps that happened after World War II started. The Hiroshima bomb, which ended World War II, and this man that was finally rediscovered and placed in his final resting place and to be with his family. So thank you for watching, as always. I really appreciate you guys. I'm working like crazy to keep these videos going. It's not always easy finding a location out in the wild. A lot of times I'm dealing with wind. Sometimes if I'm near a highway, even if it's a mile away, I still get traffic, so I got to go deeper into the forest to get away from the traffic. It's pretty crazy. I love being outside, though. I'm very comfortable out here, and I'm just having fun. So I really enjoy you guys coming along on the journey with me, and we are going to do our best. And at some point, probably this winter, I'm probably going to have to be inside my home or some other cabin or something to do stories, because the sun's going to go down early and I get off work and I'm not going to have time to do stories. So I'm thinking ahead to what that may look like down the road, And the story is still going to be a story, and we will still get out on Saturdays and get some footage of me hiking, and then we'll have some great stories. It'll be fun. I'm excited about that as well. So anyways, I'm kind of gabby tonight, but crazy story. I'm really happy for this family that they were able to get closure and the mystery was solved for them. Really hard thing to go through. Anytime you're in the wilderness, someone goes missing and you can't find them, they're gone. It's just got to be an impossible to emotionally deal with that. I can't imagine. So they were able to get some closure, but we're going to talk about that later. So thank you guys. Have a good night, and we will see you on the next one. Keep hiking.